Hello, we are so excited to show you our native speech capabilities. Welcome back to the English journey. Today, we are discussing a skill that goes beyond just grammar and vocabulary, how to speak with authority and lead with your words. My name is Anna, and I am here to guide you through the art of speaking like a leader.
And I am Abel. I am so glad to be here with you, Anna. Many of us feel like our English is technically correct, but we don't always feel like we're being heard. Today we want to talk about how to speak confidently in your daily life, whether you're at work, at school, or just meeting new people.
That is such a perfect way to put it, Abel. You know, I talk to English learners every single day, and one of the most common things I hear is this: Anna, I know the grammar, I know the words, but when I speak, I feel like people do not take me seriously. And I always tell them the same thing. The problem is almost never the words themselves. The problem is in the delivery. Confidence is not about having a perfect accent or a large vocabulary. Confidence is a set of behaviors, habits, and choices that you practice every single day until they become natural to you.
That is really reassuring to hear, Anna. I think many of us, myself included, grew up believing that some people are just naturally confident speakers, like they were born that way. But you're saying that's not actually true?
Absolutely not true. And this is one of the most important things I want every listener to understand before we go any further. Confidence in communication is 100% a practiced skill. Think about some of the most respected leaders and public speakers in the world. Many of them have spoken openly about the fact that they were terrified when they first started speaking in public. They practiced in front of mirrors, they recorded themselves, they studied other great communicators. They did not simply wake up one morning and find that they were confident. They built that confidence one conversation at a time, one presentation at a time, one decision at a time. And that is exactly what you can do too, starting today.
I love that, one conversation at a time. That makes it feel so much more achievable. So, where do we actually start, Anna? If a listener is sitting with us right now and they want to begin building this kind of confident presence in their English, what is the very first thing they should work on?
The very first thing, and I cannot stress this enough, is the speed at which you speak. We're going to talk about what I call the slow down strategy, and I want to take some real time to explain why this matters so deeply. Because most English learners, when they feel nervous or when they are not sure about their grammar, they do the opposite of slowing down. They speed up. They rush through their sentences, hoping that if they say everything very quickly, nobody will notice their mistakes. Have you ever done that, Abel?
Oh, absolutely. I remember being in a meeting at work once, and my manager asked me to explain a project update in front of the whole team. My heart was racing, and I just started talking so fast. I could hear myself speeding up, but I could not seem to stop. Afterward, my manager said, "That was good, but could you slow down a little? It was hard to follow." And I felt so embarrassed in that moment.
And that experience is so incredibly common, Abel. Thank you for sharing that because it perfectly illustrates exactly what we're talking about. Here's the interesting science behind it. When we're anxious, our body produces adrenaline. This is our natural stress response. Adrenaline speeds up our heart rate, our breathing, and as a result, our speech. So the body is literally working against us in those high-pressure moments. But here's what the most effective communicators have learned to do. They have trained themselves to use that anxiety as a signal. Instead of letting the anxiety push them to go faster, they treat that feeling as a reminder to consciously slow down.
So, slowing down is almost like a physical override of the body's natural response to stress. That's fascinating. But why does speaking slowly actually make someone sound more confident? Like, what does the listener hear that makes them think, oh, this person is a leader?
Great question. Let me explain it this way. When you speak slowly and deliberately, you are sending a very powerful unconscious message to your audience. You are saying, without using any specific words, I am comfortable here. I am not in a rush. I believe what I am saying matters, and I trust that you will wait for me. That's an enormous signal of self-esteem and authority. Think about any leader you have ever admired, whether in business, in politics, in education. When they speak, there is a certain calmness to their pace. They don't stumble over their words trying to get to the end of the sentence as quickly as possible. They give each word its proper place and time.
I can picture that so clearly. There's a kind of weight behind each word when someone speaks like that, like every sentence feels considered and intentional.
Exactly. And that word intentional is the key word here. Leadership communication is intentional communication. Every word feels chosen rather than accidental. And when you slow down your speech, you naturally give yourself more time to choose better words, to construct clearer sentences, and to think before you speak. This is a skill that benefits not just your English, but your thinking process as a whole. People who practice speaking slowly very often find that they also become clearer thinkers because the habit of slowing down carries over into how they organize their ideas in their minds.
That is such a great point. So slowing down is not just a communication trick, it's actually a thinking tool as well. Now, Anna, I want to ask you about something that's closely connected to this idea of slowing down, and that is the idea of pausing. Because I know that when I slow down, sometimes I feel like I need to fill every single moment of silence with words. I feel very uncomfortable with silence when I'm speaking.
Oh, Abel, you have just touched on one of the most underestimated and underused tools in all of communication, the pause. Most people are absolutely terrified of silence. They treat it like a mistake, like an error that needs to be fixed immediately by saying something, anything to fill the gap. You hear it all the time. People say or you know, or like constantly because they are so afraid of a moment of silence. But the reality, used with intention, silence is one of the most powerful communication tools you have access to.
Can you give us an example? Because I think it's one of those things that's easier to understand when you can actually see it in action.
Of course, imagine that you're in a team meeting and you have just finished making an important suggestion. You want people to take it seriously. If you immediately rush into saying, but of course, that's just my opinion and we could also consider other options and I'm not sure if that's the best approach, but you have just talked yourself out of your idea. You've undermined yourself with words. But what if instead, after making your suggestion, you simply stopped? You looked at the people in the room, you waited. That pause communicates something extraordinary. It says, I have said what I needed to say. It was worth saying. Now I'm giving you time to absorb it. Suddenly, the idea you presented has weight and significance because you treated it that way.
Wow, that is such a practical example. And I think most of us can immediately recognize people in our own lives who do this naturally. Those people who speak and then wait, and you feel like you really have to think about what they said. There's something very compelling about that quality.
Precisely. And there is actually research on this. Studies in communication science have shown that listeners need an average of 3 to 5 seconds to fully process a new piece of information. When you keep talking without any pauses, you are essentially pouring new information onto information that has not yet been absorbed. Your audience starts to fall behind. They miss key points. They feel overwhelmed. But when you pause strategically, you are giving their minds the space they need to actually receive and retain what you are saying. A thoughtful pause is, in a very real sense, a gift you give your audience.
I never thought about it from the audience's perspective like that. A pause is not a gap in the conversation, it is actually part of the message. It is giving the listener time to catch up and think.
That is beautifully said, Abel. I could not have expressed it better myself. And I want to add one more dimension to the power of the pause. Pausing before you answer a question. This is a habit that the most impressive and credible speakers in the world practice consistently. When someone asks you a difficult or important question, instead of immediately jumping to an answer, try pausing for 2 or 3 seconds. Take a breath. Let the question sit for a moment, and then respond. This does 2 things simultaneously. First, it makes your answer better because you've given yourself time to actually think. Second, and this is the part that surprises people, it makes you look more credible, not less. It communicates that you take the question seriously, that you are not just giving a rehearsed or impulsive answer. You are giving a considered response. That's a leadership quality.
All right, so we have talked about slowing down and using pauses with intention. Now I want to move to something that I find very counterintuitive, and you mentioned it briefly. You said that leaders often use simpler language. And this really surprised me when I first learned about it because I always assumed that to sound intelligent and authoritative, you needed to use very advanced, sophisticated vocabulary. Was I wrong about that?
You were not just a little bit wrong, Abel. You were completely wrong. And most people share that same misconception. We have this idea that complexity equals intelligence, that if you use big, difficult words and long, intricate sentences, people will think you are smart and authoritative. But the truth is precisely the opposite, especially when it comes to leadership communication.
Why is that? I find this so interesting. Why do leaders deliberately choose simpler language?
Let me answer that with an analogy. Imagine that you are building a bridge. Your goal is to connect two places so that people can cross safely and easily. Now imagine two engineers. One engineer builds a bridge that is incredibly ornate and decorative, with complicated structures and intricate patterns. It's impressive to look at, but it's difficult to cross. People stumble on it. They are not sure which path to take. The other engineer builds a bridge that is clean, simple, and direct. You can walk across it immediately without any confusion. Which bridge is doing its job better?
The simple one, obviously. The goal is to help people cross, not to impress them with the structure of the bridge itself.
Exactly. And communication works the same way. The goal of language is to transfer a thought from your mind into the mind of your listener as clearly and as efficiently as possible. When you use complicated jargon, long winding sentences, and obscure vocabulary, you are making that transfer harder. You are putting obstacles on the bridge. You might impress some people with the complexity of your language, but you are also losing a significant portion of your audience who cannot follow you. The best leaders know this. They want everyone in the room to understand them. They want their message to land clearly with the junior employee in the back row, just as much with the senior executive in the front row. And the only way to achieve that is through clear, direct, simple language.
Can you give us some practical examples, like words or phrases that people think sound professional but actually work against them?
Absolutely. Here's a very common one. In professional settings, people often say, we need to synergize our efforts to optimize our cross-functional deliverables. Now, I want to pause right there. If you're listening to this podcast and you're wondering what that sentence means, you are not alone. That sentence is full of business jargon that sounds impressive in certain corporate environments, but actually communicates very little. A leader who speaks simply would say instead, we need to work together better so that we can get more done. That sentence takes 3 seconds to understand. It's impossible to misinterpret. It moves the conversation forward. That's the kind of language that builds trust and clarity in a team.
That is a night and day difference. And when you put it that way, the simpler version actually sounds stronger and more decisive. It feels like the person saying it knows exactly what they want.
That's the key insight, Abel. Decisiveness and clarity of language are deeply connected. When someone speaks in vague, jargon-heavy sentences, the subconscious signal the listener receives is that the speaker is not completely sure what they are trying to say. But when someone speaks in clean, direct sentences with a clear point, the listener receives the signal that this person knows exactly what they want, what they think, and where they are going. That's the signal of a leader.
So, to summarize before we move on, slow down to show calm authority, pause strategically to give your words impact and let your audience process, and use simple, direct language to demonstrate clarity and decisiveness. Those 3 things together must already make a massive difference to how someone comes across in English.
Enormous difference, and each habit reinforces the others. When you slow down, pausing becomes more natural. When you pause, you give yourself time to choose simpler, clearer words. They work together as a system rather than as isolated techniques. Now I want to move to something that I consider personally one of the most counterintuitive truths about great leadership communication, and it involves not talking at all.
Now, I am very curious. Not talking at all. How does that help you speak like a leader?
We are talking about active listening, and I want to be very specific about what active listening actually means, because many people think they are good listeners when they are actually just waiting for their turn to talk. Real active listening is a focused, engaged, intentional behavior. It is one of the most powerful things you can do to build your presence, influence, and reputation as a communicator. Here's the paradox. The very best speakers in any room are almost always the very best listeners in that room, too.
Why is that? It seems almost contradictory. If you want to be known as a great communicator, should you not be focusing most of your energy on how you speak?
It seems contradictory, I understand that, but think about it from a very human perspective. What do people most want when they're in a conversation? What do they most deeply crave? They want to feel heard. They want to feel understood. They want to feel that what they are saying matters to the person they're talking with. When you practice genuine active listening, you give people that gift. And in return, people develop an extraordinary level of trust and respect for you. They want to keep talking to you. They want your opinion. They think of you as someone who truly understands people and situations. That reputation is one of the most valuable things a leader can have.
So active listening builds your reputation as a communicator, even without you saying a single word. That is remarkable. But practically speaking, Anna, what does active listening look like? Because I think a lot of people hear that advice and still feel unsure about what to actually do differently.
There are several specific concrete behaviors that make up active listening, and I want to walk through them carefully. The first is giving your full, undivided attention. In today's world, this is harder than it sounds. When someone is talking to you, your phone is face down on the table. Your eyes are not wandering around the room. Your mind is not drafting your response while they are still speaking. You are completely present with what the other person is saying. That level of presence is rare and powerful, and people feel it immediately.
That alone, just full presence, must change the dynamic of a conversation dramatically.
It does. The second behavior is asking thoughtful follow-up questions. When someone finishes speaking, instead of immediately pivoting to your own point or your own experience, you respond to what they specifically said. You might say, "That is really interesting. Can you tell me more about how that affected your team?" Or, "When you said the project was difficult, what was the hardest part for you?" These questions show that you were genuinely listening. You were not just waiting for your moment. You were truly engaged with their words. And people remember that. They remember how you made them feel in that conversation.
I have had the experience of talking to someone who does this really well, and it is remarkable. I always walk away from those conversations feeling energized and respected, and I always think very highly of that person as a communicator.
Exactly the point. And the third key behavior of active listening is paraphrasing or reflecting back what someone has said before you respond. So before you share your own perspective, you briefly summarize what you heard from the other person. You might say, "So if I understand correctly, you're saying that the deadline is the main concern here and you need more resources to meet it? Is that right?" This does several things at once. It confirms that you understood them correctly, it gives them a chance to clarify if you missed something, and it shows a level of intellectual respect and engagement that is very rare and very impactful.
Active listening really is a form of leadership. It's showing through behavior that you value the people around you and that you believe their thoughts matter.
Beautifully expressed, Abel. And now I want to move to our final major topic for today, which is an area that many English learners completely overlook, and it is absolutely crucial. We're talking about body language and tone. Because here's a remarkable fact that communication researchers have documented over many years of study. A very significant portion of what people actually receive from your communication comes not from the specific words you choose, but from how you carry yourself physically and the tone of your voice when you deliver those words.
I have heard about this before, and it always amazes me. Can you break that down for us in practical terms, Anna? Because for someone who is focused on learning English as a language, it might seem strange that the words themselves are not the most important part.
It does seem strange at first, but once you understand the reason, it makes perfect sense. Human beings evolved as social creatures long before we had the complex languages we use today. For hundreds of thousands of years, we read each other through posture, through facial expression, through tone of voice, through eye contact. These signals are deeply embedded in our neurology. We read them automatically and unconsciously. So when the words someone says and the body language they display are in conflict, our brain almost always trusts the body language over the words.
That explains so much. Like when someone says, I am fine, but they have their arms crossed, their eyes down, and their voice is flat and quiet, you do not believe them. You believe the body, not the words.
Precisely. So, for English learners who want to communicate with authority and presence, understanding and practicing confident body language is not optional. It is absolutely essential. Let me walk through the most important elements. The first is posture. The way you hold your physical body sends an immediate, instantaneous signal to everyone who sees you before you say a single word. Shoulders rolled forward, chest caved in, eyes looking at the floor. These signals communicate anxiety, uncertainty, and low confidence. But shoulders back and relaxed, chest open, spine upright, and eyes level, these signals communicate calm authority and presence.
And I imagine this actually affects how you feel internally as well, not just how others perceive you.
Yes, and this is one of the most empowering pieces of this entire discussion. Research has confirmed that the relationship between posture and emotion runs in both directions. Just as how you feel affects your posture, how you position your body can actually change how you feel. When you consciously stand or sit with an open, expansive posture for even 2 or 3 minutes before an important conversation or presentation, your body begins to produce more of the hormones associated with confidence and calm. So you're not just performing confidence for others, you're actually generating it within yourself. Your body and your mind are having a constant conversation, and you have significant influence over what that conversation says.
That is so empowering. What about eye contact, Anna? Because this one is something I personally find quite difficult. In some cultures, avoiding eye contact is actually a sign of respect. But in English-speaking professional environments, I understand it means something quite different.
You have raised an incredibly important point, and I want to address it with some sensitivity because this is a genuine cultural difference that many people navigate. In many cultures and traditions around the world, avoiding direct eye contact is indeed a sign of respect, humility, or deference, particularly toward people who are older or in positions of authority. I honor and respect that deeply. However, in most English-speaking professional environments, direct and warm eye contact carries a very specific meaning. It signals engagement, honesty, and confidence. When you maintain appropriate eye contact with someone while they're speaking, it shows them that you are present and genuinely listening. When you maintain eye contact while you are speaking, it signals that you believe in what you are saying and that you have nothing to hide.
So the key is learning to read the environment and adjust accordingly. But for most professional English-speaking contexts, practicing more direct and consistent eye contact will help you come across as more confident and trustworthy.
Exactly. And the word I want to emphasize is appropriate. This is not about staring intensely at someone without blinking. That would feel aggressive and uncomfortable. We're talking about warm, natural, engaged eye contact that holds for a few seconds at a time, moves away naturally, and then returns. A gentle but steady gaze that communicates, I'm here, I see you, and I am engaged in this conversation. That is the kind of eye contact that builds connection and trust.
And the last element of body language and tone I wanted to ask you about is the voice itself, because I know that two people can say the exact same sentence and it can feel completely different depending on how they say it.
The voice is perhaps the single most powerful instrument a communicator possesses, and it's an instrument in the truest sense. Just like a musician learns to use an instrument to produce different effects on the listeners, a skilled communicator learns to use their voice to produce different emotional and psychological effects in their listeners. There are three key dimensions of the voice that matter most. The first is volume. Speaking too quietly signals uncertainty. Speaking too loudly can feel aggressive or overbearing. The goal is a clear, grounded, comfortable volume that fills the space you're in without straining. The second dimension is tone. Tone is the emotional color of your voice. When you speak in a flat, monotone voice, your words become difficult to follow because there's no variation to guide the listener's attention. But when you allow your voice to rise slightly, to express enthusiasm or curiosity, and to drop lower to express something serious or important, your words become alive and engaging. Listeners naturally pay more attention because the changing tone tells them where to focus.
And the third dimension?
The third is what we might call downward inflection at the end of statements. This one is subtle but very significant. In English, the voice naturally rises at the end of a question. This is how we signal to the listener that we are asking rather than telling. But many speakers, particularly when they feel uncertain or nervous, use an upward rising inflection at the end of statements as well. This is sometimes called upspeak. When you state something as a fact, but your voice rises at the end, it sounds like you're asking a question. It sounds like you're not sure whether what you said is true. It immediately undermines your authority. Confident, authoritative speakers end their statements with a downward inflection. Their voice settles and grounds at the end of a sentence. It's a small but extremely powerful adjustment that signals certainty, conviction, and leadership presence.
I have definitely caught myself doing that, especially in situations where I wasn't sure how the other person would receive what I was saying. My voice would go up at the end as if I was almost asking permission for my own opinion to be valid.
And that's such an honest and insightful observation, Abel. That upward inflection often comes precisely from that place of seeking approval. It's a verbal form of asking, is it okay that I said that? And when you practice ending your statements with a grounded, downward inflection instead, you're doing something profound. You're telling yourself and everyone listening that your opinion doesn't require anyone's approval to be valid. You believe what you are saying. You stand behind it. That is the voice of a leader.
This has been such an extraordinarily rich conversation, Anna. I feel like every single point we discussed today connects to something much deeper than just language. It connects to self-respect, to clarity of thought, to genuine human connection. Slowing down is not just a speech technique, it's a way of saying that your words and the words of the people you are speaking with are worth the time and the space.
You have arrived at exactly the heart of everything we discussed today, Abel. And I want to take a moment to tie all of these threads together for every listener who has stayed with us on this journey. Speaking like a leader is not about performing a character that's different from who you are. It's not about pretending to be someone you are not. It's about making a series of conscious, deliberate choices each time you open your mouth to speak. You choose to slow down because your thoughts deserve to be heard clearly and without a rush. You choose to pause because the ideas you share deserve space to breathe and to land in the hearts and minds of your listeners. You choose simple, direct language because real communication is not about displaying your vocabulary, but about genuinely connecting one human mind to another in every single conversation you choose to show up for.
And the beautiful thing that I will carry with me from today is the knowledge that none of this requires perfection, and none of it requires a native accent or a flawless command of grammar. Because leadership and communication is ultimately about one thing above all else, and that is the sincere, committed intention to connect with another human being as clearly, as honestly, and as respectfully as you possibly can in every single conversation you choose to show up for.